I'm humbled. I am honored. My background is history. I came up started as a volunteer in 1979 at Harvest Ferry National Historical Park. I've worked with natural history sites a lot, so I'm not entirely ignorant. My wife and I usually in the summer times go to a natural history site. Next week we'll go to North Cascades and Mount Rainier in the next 2 weeks. So I'm a lover of those sites. Thank you, Tom. I am a bit of a thinker, and so along the way I've done a lot of reading about science, about the philosophy of science, how science works, what science is, and what it may not be. So I have some familiarity with that, but I'm by no means an expert. So I'm here today, not with answers, but with perspectives, maybe some ideas and some recommendations, and back to some principles that may sound familiar or are worth kind of refocusing, perhaps in this 21st century right now. I've been reading about you all. Every time it's come up here in the last month, 2 months since I accepted this job, they're going, oh, the Heartland Network, man, they've really got it together. Wow, the Heartland Network, wow, zoom. Those people, they're the ones who really got it together. That's terrific. It exemplifies so much of what we need to do in the National Park Service, cross-divisional stuff. And even beyond cross-divisional stuff, if we couldn't even get our cross-divisional stuff right, how in the world would we get our relationships with the public right? We're all on the same side. How would we go further? So you guys are this great model. I think it might kind of work like this. If you go to Harvest Ferry, West Virginia, probably been there. You go to Maryland Heights. It's about 1,400 feet high, and you start the hike at about 200 feet. So it's a 1,200-foot elevation in about 2 miles. So it's kind of rugged. And you drag your butt up to the top of the Maryland Heights. You run into one of these waysides. Harvest Ferry is full of Civil War history, and up here, this beautiful view overlooking Pleasant Valley is, of course, the place where the Union Army put 100-pound guns during the Civil War, because they commanded the valley, right? When I say 100-pound guns, it means they shot a 100-pound shell. So it's these big, honking, heavy things. And it's your typical National Park Service wayside. It's biggest, mostest, widest, fattest. It's something like the superlative. You kind of be impressed because you got your own butt up there. If you read that, how did you get the gun up here? But I don't think it's going to keep you awake at night. You're not going to, probably remember this too long or in too intense a way. Though, if you notice, there's some scratches on the side of the stanchion. That's really kind of what I want to call attention to. I'll just tell you what they say. They say, why? Somebody's scratching on here. Why, in the midst of nature's terrific beauty, must we memorialize war? So you see body language going. All of a sudden, that wayside becomes a lot more interesting, doesn't it? There's this sort of tension there, and there's this perspective there. If you go back up there now, somebody's come along, they're pissed off at whoever did that, and they've scratched that out, So there's this conversation of democracy taking place on top of the hill, top of the mountain. And sometimes I talk with chiefs of interpretation, say, you want to make your waysides better, go out in the middle of the night. Put some multiple points of view up there. But see, you guys have got it correct. You got a room full of scientists, research managers, and interpreters, and you guys all understand what's powerful about this spot is that it's meaningful to lots of people for lots of different reasons. And the one thing that those who memorialize war and those who stand in awe of that beauty, the thing that they hold in common is that that place needs to be protected, that place needs to be preserved, that place needs to be held to in some kind of a way. So you guys have already got that. It represents the future in my mind of how we need to be able to deal with multiple audiences all at the same place, finding common ground. I think another thing that you all probably get is the essence of this quote here. Tanaka Shozo was a Japanese conservationist who died in, I think, 1913 or so. He actually, he fought the Ashio copper mines. They were mining copper up high in the mountains and just throwing all of the debris, the ore, into the leftover detritus into the streams and things. And down in the valley, the peasants are turning blind, and the fish are dying, et cetera, et cetera. And Shozo, this is the point where Japan is modernizing, wants to sort of westernize, and they've built a constitution and government stuff. Shozo's part of that. And he's sure that the government will do the right thing and stop the Ashio copper mine from hurting the people, destroying the land. And of course, they don't, you know, and he takes petition after petition. He finally gets so desperate one time, in 1907, he rushes the emperor. He's got a petition, a rolled up scroll in his hand. And he knows that if he touches the emperor, that he'll be killed, he'll be executed. But you know, this will be a martyrdom that will allow everybody to know that the peasants need to be taken care of. The poor guy starts running out of the street, and some mounted cop sees him and knocks him over, and they're smart. The people around the emperor, they say, you know, if we put him in jail, but if we execute this guy, we'll just turn him into a martyr. So they called him a joke, they called him a madman, they let him out the next day. So even Shozo's deep desire, you know, willingness to give up his life is kind of foiled. I tell you the story because he's almost unknown in the West. There's one biography written on the guy. But I think he speaks to the heart of what we're all about. The care of rivers is not a question of rivers, but of the human heart. Stewardship, resource management, science. We are about caring for the rivers, yes? Doing things for the rivers, for the resource, for the places themselves. That's good, that's noble, that's terrific. But Shozo says, as much as he loves the rivers and the mountain, he says, it's not about the rivers. It's about the human heart. So I'm suggesting that Shozo uses the word care two different ways. Care for the rivers and care about the rivers. And the question is, and I think we together have the answer, is how in the world can we expect larger society to support the care for the rivers unless they first care about the resources, care about the places themselves. And that's why we got to be together. That's why we've got to do all of this in concert with each other. And what's cool, I think, about that is that, you know, what they taught me from 27 years ago when I started the National Park Service, that we have a dual mission that's contradictory, that you can't use and preserve at the same time. I'm not sure I buy that altogether, because I'm increasingly feeling that interpretation and working with research management, working with science is exactly the way to unify that dual mission, to have people care enough about it so that they might actually care for it. So the idea is that interpretation education, just like resource management, it's directly involved in the care, the protection of the resources. And I know you guys all know that. But man, I've had to talk about that for an awful long time. This is sort of the first place I've ever got to go, I know you know that. Okay. Let's do this. I want you to imagine yourself to be alive in the 1850s. You live in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. No, it's Virginia then, if it's the 1850s. Let's go back even a little bit more. Say, but you're alive in the 1830s, late 1830s. You're a woman. You're 20 years old. You live in a boarding house. You got 2 kids. Been married a couple of years. You live up on the 3rd story. It's a hot Monday day. I got off the plane yesterday, and I was very gratified to realize that you people here are suffering just as much as we are in Washington. That it's not just hurting us. It's a day like now, you know. And you wake up, say it's a Monday morning, and the sheets are sticking to you. And man, you just don't even want to get up today because Monday is your laundry day. And you got to do the laundry today because your husband's going down to work in the United States Gun Factory. And right now he's a laborer, but you got a lot of hope that, you know, he's impressed the right people, that he's going to make his way up in society. He's going to, you know, maybe be a foreman one of these days. In order to do that, make that, you got to play by the rules. He's got to go off to work every day with a nice, clean, white boiled shirt. He's got to, you know, be able to act like a gentleman so that he can move up in the ranks of things. So this day, as hot as it is, you go to the water source, maybe the well or a cistern out back, down 3 flights of stairs, back up 3 flights of stairs, carrying that water. You got an open fireplace. You got a boil, and probably in a copper, maybe a cast iron pot. You're gonna put that laundry in there and you're gonna stir. You know, make sure your skirts aren't gonna catch fire. You're gonna stir that boiling laundry, and you're gonna sweat. You're not working class. You're not destitute. You're rising middle class, and that's what it takes to be alive in the 1830s in the United States of America. To be middle class, it takes a dozen jobs every single day that are going to make you break a sweat. That's what it is. Okay? So move the clock up 20 years. You're no longer that woman. You are now that woman's husband. And you did make a formal job. That's great. You're making some money. You moved out of that boarding house a few years back. You moved into your own house, one of your owner's homes. That's great. And a few years back, you were able to buy a cast iron stove, which takes a lot less wood, a lot less danger for your wife catching her skirts on fire. You've got some nice art prints up on your wall now. Consider yourself a modern person, you're a consumer, you're doing great. But your wedding anniversary is coming up, and this one's, 20th, you want it to be special. What are you going to get your wife? What do you get her something that says I love you? So what you do is you go to Charlestown, which is about 8 miles up the road, the county seat, on sale day. And there at that spot, you're going to purchase for your wife a 20-year-old slave woman. Think of the way that the calluses can now slip off your wife's hands, and all the reading that she can do, and the visiting that she can be a lady. You can literally buy your wife her own time, her own life, by buying her somebody else's life. My question is, are you an ogre? Are you a sadist? Are you an evil person? Those are tough questions, really. But I think at least part of the answer is that you're a lot like us. Somehow, that's what's so terrifying to me about the idea of slavery, the heinous elements of slavery. Somehow, people like us who went to church, who went to weddings, and went to funerals, loved their children, tried to get ahead, people like us somehow convinced themselves that it was all right for some human beings to own other human beings. Not like us. So what does this have to do with climate change? What does this have to do with science and stuff coming together? Well, it does, I think. Because if people like us 150 years ago were willing to step into something as heinous and terrible as the institution of slavery, how are they going to deal with something like climate change? They were willing to accept slavery for two reasons. Slavery could make their lives easier, and society told them that it was okay. So let's look at climate change today. It's not nearly as heinous. It's not really. It doesn't have the drama of something like slavery. To do the things that we're supposed to do to get rid of climate change really kind of screws up how easy my life is. That's a lot of work. And there are elements of society that says it's all crap anyway. So it's really kind of easy to take a left turn. If we were willing to put up with slavery, how much more willing are we going to be willing to put up with climate change? Does that make sense? It scares me to death. Yikes. How do we do this communicating? How do we connect? I think of my father. My father's 75 years old. PhD, college professor, seminary professor, he's retired now. His parents were both born in Norway. And so we got this fishing thing going on. And he knew somebody back when who had started a salmon farm. So, I just forgot about all that. One day I'm telling Dad, Dad, salmon stuff, I love salmon, but these farms, it's sliced, and it takes like 2.5 pounds of fish protein to create a single pound of salmon, and I'm trying to teach him how to eat corn right now, and this is bad stuff. And man, my dad just freaked. My dad just got so upset. What could be wrong with salmon farming, et cetera, et cetera. He's an educated, intelligent man. Denial is a powerful thing. He likes salmon, This is not going to be easy for him. And so we're not going to talk about it ever again, I don't think. And I really don't know, what he's ever going to do about it, But if you ask my father in one of these surveys, is global warming truly happening and human beings causing it? He'd say, yes, strongly agree. Yes, we need to do something about it right away, right? Yikes. Yikes. Not easy stuff. So what do? And this may just sound like a truism. This may just sound too easy. But I think it's really pretty complicated. It's what I want to look at for the rest of our time. We have to start where we are. We have to start exactly where we are. And finding out exactly where we are is the rub. It's the trick. It's the thing that's some of the hard work at the beginning, because most of us in this room want to save the world, and that's why we joined the Park Service. Most of us in this room know the answers, understand what's going on, and know how to take the action and make it different. It's all we got to do is show it to reasonable people, shake them a little bit, and we can make the world okay, right? The problem is that my dad's not going to react that way, and he's a lot more reasonable than a lot of people that I interact with. And so how do we get there? We can't afford not to have them involved. We can't afford to have them not be part of the behavioral change that absolutely has to occur. So technical stuff I'm not worried about. I could teach interpreters and research managers all about how to interpret controversial issues, how how to be ready for an argument, how to sidestep an argument, how to diffuse an argument. I can do that, and you would learn that. There would be no problem, and maybe we should do that. I'm sure we should do that at some stage. But what I'm more worried about is the transformation that I think, and that many others in the Park Service think, needs to happen within us as well, or maybe even first. Second Century Report, anybody read it? Really want to do that. John Jarvis was the staffer, he was the liaison to the Second Century Report. He's all about the Second Century Report. Second Century was the commission of big deal folks. Jim McPherson, it's a history site, but who would I reach for in the science side? What's your name? Sandra Day O'Connor, ex-governors and senators, so like 30 big-time people who a little more than a year ago went to 5 different parks and divided up into different committees and wrote a big report that's gone to Congress and may did some ground after a while. It did some visionary things, more than I'm going to tell you about, but some of the things that it asks for is for the Park Service to think about itself in addition to its mission as filling a role in society that it hasn't filled before. One of those roles is educational. But also, it asks the National Park Service, what can the Park Service do to help make people's lives better? And how can the National Park Service help people make differences, help people engage? Some of you recognize some of this language as civic engagement. I hear you're doing something on Friday about civic engagement. Listen to this part really, really well. I'm not an expert. I've spent a lot of time reading about civic engagement, dealing with people who are experts in civic engagement. And the first thing I've noticed is that every one of them has a different definition. And I'm not fighting that. So what I say now really isn't, I'm not worried about what you hear on Friday, because I think that's going to be a good thing. I'm just going to use the concept of engagement. I think that we as the National Park Service need to be able to interact with society in a more effective way. And it's got to happen from the director of the National Park Service down through superintendents, down through division chiefs, all the way down to line rangers, and et cetera, et cetera. And then there are different responsibilities for each one of them, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The idea is how do we engage the public? How do we meet them where they are? And it's going to require transformation. I've got a good friend named well, let me tell you about this too. Another example of that transformation that's necessary is spoken of in the Renaissance Action Plan that the interpreters put out 4 or 5 years ago. And one of their tenets, they call for a Renaissance Ranger, a 21st century Ranger, who isn't so much anymore about actually doing the work. It isn't so much about giving talks and giving programs and doing informal talks. Still do some of that. But that ranger, that interpreter's job is to help facilitate the effective work of others doing that work in some kind of way. When you think about this a little bit, we know that we've got 5,000 interpreters. That's including the seasonals in the summertime. We're paid, and I train them and I try to get as many of them as I can. I may be between online courses and satellite courses and real classroom courses. I may get to 3,000 or 4,000 of them a year. 5,000 of them are employed. Now get this, volunteers, cooperating association people, other uniformed employees. We have 75,000 people who have practitioners who have some responsibility for doing interpretation in the National Park Service. And I'm not even counting concessioners because we don't know how to count them. Right? That's huge. So that transition, that transformational rangers, that Renaissance Rangers, we're trying to say is that we've got these few paid people. They need to be the bearers of the standard. They need to be the ones who set the example. They need to be the coaches. They need to be the team leaders. They need to be the ones who can enable others to do the job at their same level of effectiveness. But that's hard for a lot of rangers. They want to be experts. They want to be ones who are up there in front, who want to be authorities. It's always hard to change. It's always hard to transform. That's another one of the noises out there. It's another one of the forces that's pulling the Park Service to change. I'd say another way is when you listen to and you hear about John Jarvis's desire for parks to become more relevant. I got called a few months back about Civil War's 150th anniversary. David, we want to have the best training ever. We want to have Civil War interpreters do it right. We want them to be relevant in ways they've never been relevant before. And I'm like, okay, but what does that look like? know? What does relevance mean? Do we feel like we need to get out and tell people about how we see the place as meaningful and relevant? And if we get out to new audiences and do that, that they're going to fall in love with us and then come to our place? Did my language work there? Did I use a complete sentence? I mean, is it enough for us to go out and say, hey, we're doing all this great stuff, and now we invite you to our place, and you can love that? I suspect not. Because I think one of the assumptions that people were telling me when they were saying we got to do civil war in a relevant way, one of the suspicions was that we weren't talking about slavery. I've done some looking around. I think most parts are talking about slavery as the cause of the war. That's all there. It hasn't changed our visiting demographic in any kind of significant way that we're aware of. We're talking about that material a lot. It seems to me that if we really want to be relevant, that's going to cause us to have to change again. We're going to have to figure out how other people think we're relevant. We're going to have to ask for other people to tell us what's meaningful about our places in ways that we're not aware of. Isn't that scary? But isn't it the only thing that we've got? There are about 24,000 of us when you pay everybody in the summertime. That's not enough to save the national parks, folks. It's just not enough. You can't put us 24,000 people around the borders of Yellowstone and protect Yellowstone. It's the 21st century. If we are not able to interact with society and help society decide to be stewards themselves, then I think we've got a lost cause. I think we've got a lost cause. And it's hard because we have to be able to change to meet that society where it is. And that's hard. And a lot of us are worried, well, what about our laws? What about our responsibilities? What about the things that we need to do? I'm not asking us to think about the things that we hold dearest and nearest. We do have a responsibility to protect. We need to be able to move into some new space, being able to meet people in different ways than perhaps we ever had before. My good friend Dave Thielen is an expert in this, one of the experts in this area. He wrote a book 10 years ago, 12 years ago, called The Presence of the Past. There was a big survey of how Americans use history, use the past. Got lots of news, especially in the museum, library circles, museum particularly. And Dave knows all of the people are doing this in kind of a big way. So he's kind of been tutoring me and introducing me to people with this civic engagement stuff. What Dave says is that usually when people do civic engagement, it fails. They see it as just another way of talking about partnership. He says you can't succeed with real engagement unless you first start with yourself. That you have to ask yourself a set of questions. You have to decide, is this what you want to do? Is what I'm suggesting, what I'm talking about. I'm not the guy who's making this stuff up. About reaching out in ways that we haven't before, in recognizing elements of relevance that we haven't been too good at recognizing before. Are we willing to do that? Is that worth it to us? I'm 5 years away from retirement if I want to be. I'm not quite the starry-eyed, naive guy who wanted to change the world even 10 years ago. I could just coast pretty much now. Do I really want to do it? What do I have that I can offer to somebody else that can help them engage? What does my park have? What resources do you as a superintendent have that you can share? You're not giving away the keys to the store. What have you got that can help somebody in your neighborhood, a partner somewhere in your neighborhood, do something that they haven't been able to before? Who can you partner with that's different than you are, that you purposely want to partner with, just because they're different than you are, because they have access to a demographic that you don't know anything about? Are you willing to listen empathetically to those people? Are you willing to invest in a relationship long term with those people? Are you willing to make tough choices as a manager? Go, no, this partnership's not going to score. This isn't going to work. I'm going to back off. Or this is a short-term partnership versus perhaps a long-term partnership. I'm suggesting that that meeting with people who are different and bringing people who are different than what we usually work with into the same space is a creative act. And I'm asking us to sort of step away from operations, which is an act that's very hard for us as National Park Service to step away from operations. But to be able to step away and do a creative thing and say, how can my community, how can I be a part of the community and help people in my community in ways they haven't before? And the other thing that you got to be willing to do if you're going to do that is be willing to fail, because a lot of times it fails. It hurts. misunderstandings occur. If you fail forward, if you can learn from that failure, it's the kind of park service that I think Judge Jarvis is looking for. It's the kind of transformation that I think that we have to have, or we're going to stay the same. If we keep trying to answer the question about relevancy by saying that we need to recruit a more diverse workforce, of course we need to recruit a more diverse workforce. But is that going to change everything? It's something we need to do for its own reason. Is that going to change everything? I kind of doubt it. The other thing I keep hearing is the way to be relevant is to use more and more technology. Maybe. You know? But there's still people who are going to come to our parks, who are going to see our parks, who are going to go in places that maybe they shouldn't go into. How do we deal with all of that? How do we have people feel welcome? How do we have people, you know, see the place as different than differently? How do we allow ourselves to allow people to see the place differently than we do? Are we willing to change? And if not, you know, maybe this engagement stuff isn't really on the table, isn't really even possible. One last note along those lines. What I'm really asking if we can do, the interpreters have a phrase called the visitor is sovereign. Sovereign like a nation, sovereign like a king, sovereign like a queen, control your borders, not let anybody in, et cetera, et cetera. Free will. The civic engagement people use the word agency. I'm trying to stay away from the word agency because we keep getting confused. Is he talking about fish and wildlife or whatever? We all have agency, our free will, our willingness to make our own decisions, our own power. That's in effect what this engagement concept is about. From visitors all the way to partners, recognizing them as having their own perspectives and having to work with those perspectives instead of dumping a message on them that more often than not, though, they may walk away from. The perfect example of this, I love this, is I was watching a documentary with Jerry Seinfeld, and he'd gone back out to do stand-up comedy, right? And so I see the shots of him saying, you know, he's in front of the crowd. He goes, you know, I had the biggest television sitcom that had ever been done. I made lots and lots of money. I sold records. I've done movies. You know, I've devoted my life to comedy. I've told 1 million jokes. He goes, if I'm an expert in comedy, how come it's you who gets to decide what's funny? It's agency. You know, that's that free will. That's that power. So what you have to understand is no matter how good your science is, no matter how passionate your interpreter is, it's in the end, it's the audience who gets to decide if this is meaningful to them or if it's offensive to them. If they want to hold on to it and have it become part of them, or if they want it to go away. And if you're not willing to start there, I think we're doing it, to tell you the truth. Okay, so who are those people? If we're willing to start with ourselves and decide if we can make our own personal changes, and if we can get engaged civically ourselves, who are the people? Who are, if we start with ourselves and then we also start where the people are, who are they? Some of you probably know about this. I can give you the website later if you'd like. This is on climate change. There's 6 Americas study. I've been reading a lot about surveys and things that on climate change about America. This is the most current stuff I see. It's just June. This is just like a month and a half ago. So it's pretty hot. It doesn't change a lot. They're worried about this drop from November of 2008. Of course, the election was going on. Nobody can really be sure as to why you lost 8% of the people who were alarmed, you know, over that 2 years. Well, I don't know. Our politics have shifted. Our attention has moved a little bit. It's creeping back up. They're happy about that. We can look here and see that, well, you know, these 6 groups of Americans, categories of Americans and their attitudes about climate change, you know, more than half are kind of there. More than that's good news, that they kind of think that it's important, kind of think that something needs to be going on. Basically, the surveys I've been reading say that, yeah, you know, more Americans than not, even 7 out of 10 say that climate change is occurring and thinks that somebody should do something about it right away. but aren't willing to pay any taxes to make it happen, or particularly take any action that will make themselves uncomfortable. So there's that denial thing going on, you know? It's a problem, it's not my problem yet. It's a problem for people far away, or it's for people far away into the future. It's not my problem yet. And so that's maybe kind of that group up there. Another interesting thing, most of this group, there's a determiner to be sorted by ideology, partisan, literally Republican, conservative, though not all conservatives believe that, or fall in the doubtful category, but it's easier to find them in the doubtful category than not. Another one of the really cool things that I think is valuable in this is that pretty much they said 7 out of 10 Americans want to know more about climate change, which puts us in a pretty good place in the National Park Service, I think. And they're suggesting that these two categories, which is a pretty big group of people when you come right down to it, their main desire, what they really want to learn, where we need to meet them, is with action, is with how can I do something, how can I participate, what can I do to make things better. That's really important to understand and to know, but to also know that that's not what these folks are about. What do you think these folks are about? What do they want to know? What are they curious about, interested in? Say again? Somebody?
They want proof.
They want proof, exactly. They want to understand the science and and find out if it's really true. They want to find out if it's really true and how does science get you there, which is, I think, a really important insight. There's a lot of you are scientists here going, but we know the truth. I know you know the truth. You've got the science behind you. And my suggestion that we have to start where we really are, where the visitor really is, means that your science doesn't seem as powerful as we know it really is. The problem is that for the most part, Americans are illiterate in terms of how science operates and how it works. So to use the word theory for many people, it's like Tom's opinion, versus what a theory is, what it means to have created a theory in terms of science. There's real opportunity there. To know that these folks are interested in cautious and doubtful and even dismissive, are interested in knowing more about it, want to know how the science works, it's a win when you plant the seed of having people start to understand how science works. It's hard. It's not easy right away, because what you're sort of saying is they want proof, but what you're saying is that the way science works is that it doubts everything. So even showing us our most current stuff, it's not like we're careful about it because it could change. We sound like we're not really sure about it, which is confusing to folks. Well, what I think the best answer to a lot of these folks are, here's the deal. There are more scientists who agree on climate change and global warming, that it's occurring and that it's human caused, than support the plate tectonics theory. That's just huge. And how did they get there? They got there because they're a bunch of doubters. They got there because they tested each other a gazillion times. They got there because they never accepted an answer that they couldn't, push back on in some kind of way. This thing has been ground down so fine that you can bet on it. That's because this idea of a conspiracy that the scientists are getting together to promote themselves. They're doubters. They don't get along that well. Same thing with Flight 93. I want to, Flight 93. There's always when the 9/11 planes had crashed into the passengers brought down. People are all constantly. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories and stuff about that, and it comes up all the time. And sometimes I just want to grab them and say, "Do you understand? The people of Somerset County who've been here for 12 generations can't agree on what day of the week it is. You really think they could run a conspiracy? It's not going to happen. They're independent people. This is set. To plant that seed is not a small thing, because this is also a long-term game. Like it or not, we're behind. We're behind. So you got to do what you can do, and helping people become more literate about science is one of those really, I think, valuable ways that we need to appreciate and we need to understand, and that interpreters need to take on. Do some of that reading, do some of that understanding, do some of that philosophy to be able to articulate how science operates and how it works. Those are critical tools, critical opportunities. thing with those folks right here in the end who want proof. The surveys and things have been finding that proof often happens best when the abstract, when the data, when the concept is tied to a place. The Park Service is all about the thing itself. The Park Service is all about authenticity, about the globe being the real thing. Do you guys have that? That's one of my questions. I mean, we've got, most people think when they surveys say too, most people think when they think global warming, they're thinking melting icebergs and Antarctica and the polar bears. What about us? Do you have things that you can show people? Things that have changed in your place? Let's talk. Tell me about that. I'd like to be educated about that. Do you have, are those things possible here in the Heartland? To be able to say that this used to be like this and now it's like that? It's going to be a really long week unless you get stuck in talking. It's tougher, so it's not here yet.
It's hard to find anything that people can get a hold of. We don't have the town falling into the ocean, or we don't have the melting glacier, but we do have shifting populations.
Do you have that? I mean, if there's enough to even have an interpreter be able to say, yeah, to be able to say, yeah, we see it changing. This is what's going on. We may not be certain it's climate change, but these are the things we're looking at. These are the science that's going on in this park. This is what's happening here. And if this continues to happen like this, what are the possible scenarios? So I want to encourage and say that the interpreters need to know what those scenarios are, be able to say that, you know, that's really where a lot of the arguments among scientists are right now, where the work is happening, is what global warming means over time, and how it might play out. That's where a lot of the discussion and conflict and the practice of science is really going on. I think because a lot of people you're going to run into are at this stage, an interpreter needs to be able to know that material, know those possible scenarios enough that you can meet them as well. Does it make sense what I'm saying? To be able to ground your place in the real science that's going on has much greater potential for having people see a difference and think about things perhaps differently than they did before. You don't want to lie about that, but you don't want to hold it back either. You want to be able to say, this is changing, this is different, and this we think, you know, we can attribute to climate change, this we don't. Be honest about it, honest broker, you know, there it is, you know, coming out. That's the kind of power that we as the National Park Service have, as an honest broker. Not being an advocate, not looking like we're pushing an agenda. If we look like we're the ones who can give you the honest answer and let you see all sides of what's going on, and that we're taking care of stuff, that's the win for us. That's where people want us to be. We don't lose that in any kind of way. But you've got to say what it is. You know, you've got to say what's going on in your place, so that people can really connect to it in a meaningful kind of a way. Interpreters can do this pretty well. Some of them. Well, many of them. Not all of them are terrific, but what has gone on in interpretation in the last 15, 20 years is that we've learned how to deconstruct what success is, how a tangible thing in the resource has meanings, and that visitors relate to these tangibles in terms of their meanings. And so they've got to be linked together. And we've learned how you can take a relationship of a tangible resource to its intangible meanings, how it fits in the system, how it fits in a process, how it fits in a belief, you know, how it fits in lots of different things. All these potentially different relationships. And the interpreter needs to tell a story about it, or needs to give an illustration about it, needs to use some kind of interpretive technique that helps people start to get their heads around it, feel differently about it. It's an opportunity to feel differently or to think differently than they ever had before. We've learned how to isolate those things. We've gotten to a place where we can actually do certification, where we can train people to look at a program, and 85% of the time they'll agree on where the opportunities were, where they weren't, et cetera. And finally, every one of our successful interpreter programs, we feel, does this by exploring a meaningful idea. You're saying something meaningful about the resource or a theme of some kind. So all that stuff is there. We've got satellite programs, we've got books out now, we've got online stuff. We've got, you know, pretty traditional understandings of how interpretation works. I'm now going to step into thinking about engagement and maybe trying some stuff that we haven't been so haven't done before. Venn diagram. So Right now, the interpreter's main responsibility is to help somebody connect. If you look in the Oxford Dictionary, connection means interdependence. That if somebody, if something makes a connection, they somehow affect the thing they're connected to, and the thing they're connected to somehow affects them. Does that make sense? It's kind of what you want. You want people care enough about that they might care for. And this is, this has been our target for the last 15, 20 years, maybe even longer. That's kind of what we're about. Now it's dealing with some of this engagement stuff. We're starting to think about some other possibilities. None of these 5 words are more important than the other. The Venn diagram is meant to move and be rubbery. I don't know how to do that on the thing. But I'm wondering, gee, and I need to do some evaluation to find out, how much more connection can occur if I ask an audience member to express themselves? What the very work of articulating, of saying something, of saying what the thing means to you, or describing what you're going through, how will that reinforce your possible connections? Make sense what I'm saying? So how can interpreters and how can scientists, when they're out in the field, what might that mean to them? What might they do in order to help people connect? Conversation, discussion, eyeball to eyeball. Meet people where they are. You don't have to persuade them. Listen to them, learn from them, figure out where their heads are, try to plant a seed to move them further forward. As they express themselves, you get a better idea of where those possible handles are to help move them forward, to help have them think differently than they may have before. My dentist, I love my dentist, he's 75. I can't believe I just said I love the dentist, I do. He's a scientist, he's a dentist. He's given me this doubt about climate change, kind of flipped me out that he said that. He said, no, I just think, that it's the fad of the day. And I thought about it, I said, well, Joe, if it's the fad of the day, the scientists I know sure are taking it seriously because they're scared. That was enough for Joe to take it seriously, to think again about maybe what all of this stuff is, that it's not just people talking, it's not just an academic exercise. I think they're scared, I think they're worried. So talk about that emotion was enough for Joe to think differently about it. So, hopefully next time I go back, me and Joe talk a little bit more about climate change, and I push the cart down the road a little bit more. We can do this in a more disciplined kind of a way. You could hold discussions, you could hold forums in your park. If you got a communicator, you got an interpreter who's good enough, we should. Training could help us that way, facilitation, being able to just open up the door and ask visitors, here's what's going on this site. What are your feelings? What are your thoughts about climate change? And facilitate a conversation where you really get to learn more about who your visitors are, and at the same time help those who are making connections deepen their connections through expression. So I connect, that may make me want to express, maybe I express, which deepens my connection, all the way down here to participation. Participation is very cool. I can have people participate in an activity on an interpretive program, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's a fleeting kind of thing. Maybe the park organizes a come clean up the watershed day, come clean up the river day, come clean up the so-and-so day, and people come to participate. That's cool. Can you imagine how, while they're participating, doing that kind of work, they're also talking to each other, so they're expressing themselves, right? And they're deepening their thinking somehow, and it's deepening their connections. Does that make sense? That this all sort of reinforces and all connects with each other. I don't think that we purposely, as an interpretive culture and as a park service culture, figured out, embraced this, really. We've done some of it, but have we embraced it in a disciplined way, thought about how powerful a thing it could be? Most interpreters think their job is to stand up and be the authorities, tell the story in a way that's palatable and that's fun. What about allowing the visitor to participate and do some of the talking themselves? Wow, what about citizen science? That's a really big one. Here's a place for that participation to really kick up. In some of the youth programs, the YCC, I'm trying to start a field school for graduate students who, under the age of 25, can we figure out a way in youth programs to allow people to work with the Park Service at different points, different ages, but have a place to progress to as they move along and deepen constantly their connections and their attachments to parks. ACT, we can argue about the semantics of all of this, but ACT has to do, I think, when the visitor does something on their own, decides to vote, decides to write a letter, decides to buy a book, decides to tell their neighbor that, hey, this is a really pretty cool place, and it's threatened, the glaciers weren't there anymore, you know, blah, 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 blah. That's where their sovereignty really kicks in. That's where their agency, you know, you can see that happening in a really very significant way. And then partner. That's when the work of the partner and the Park Service are in alignment, trying to go someplace. And that's where I think, you know, division chiefs and superintendents, really, that's the place where you got to investigate yourself, what you're willing to do in terms of partnership. Are you willing to partner for difference instead of partnering for resources? Instead of partnering so that if they got money and ways to get you somewhere where you want to go, partnering to get to a new demographic, partnering to expand the meaning base of your park. It sounds scary. It makes sense to me that the superintendent's going to do that in terms of long-term relationships. And it's different for every place. Is it you know, the local nursery for you? Is it the farm store, you know, for you? Is it the Kiwanis Club? You know, who are the different groups of people who are surprising, who may share some values, some meaning, some care about the place that you two could work together with. I think it also means a lot for division chiefs, because it's division chiefs who are usually planning special events, or at least interpreters who are working on media exhibits and stuff like that. Why not, more than just even having a partner represented on your team, why not have a partner that's embraced and acknowledged as co-sponsoring, taking co-responsibility for the event, for the exhibit? And that means that in your planning, you know, you've got to have equal weight. You've got to share the power. How is it that you're going to create this exhibit in some kind of way? I'm not saying that you've got to do whatever your partner tells you to. That's not partnership. Real partnership is about both of you investing in each other. It's not easy. You know, it's not hard, and that's part of that's why superintendents matter. That's why division chiefs are learning how to do that kind of stuff. You're looking for real partners. It's a creative act, and only you can do it. It's your place, because only, you know, you're in a local community. You're going to say something. Okay, just took a big swallow. Okay, so I think that all of these different elements can happen, can be applied, both all the way down to the frontline person, all the way up to the superintendent, all the way up to the director. You know, who are the national partners? They just advertised the chief of interpretation for the National Park Service yesterday, and I'm hoping that person understands that hers or his job should be a lot about finding national partners that individual parks can plug into and can use in lots of ways. Different people, different places. Okay. Another thing that interpreters, I think, need to think about, and that scientists and resource managers can help with. Visitors are increasingly looking for experience. That's back to that participation stuff. They want to do something. What can you do to allow them to participate? What can you do, even if it's junk science or something? What can you do to help them get an idea of what's going on? You know, understand how it works and what you're doing in your place and stuff over time. Civil War sites, I don't know. It's places like, you know, Harper's Ferry, I think, would be a place where you could do a weekend and have people from the city come out who are too afraid to go become reenactors, but we trust the Park Service and want them, you know, be a reenactor for the weekend. You know, wear Civil War clothes and immerse themselves in, you know, in that kind of an experience. There's also very subtle and other ways to think about experience. When I did the talk about, when I did that little bit about the buy a slave kind of a thing, what did I do? I asked you to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. I asked you to live into the story as if it were happening. So you had to make choices, you had to imagine, you had to, in effect, have an experience if you were engaged. Not everybody was engaged, that's fine. Many of our interpreters think they need to do what college told them about history, and that is explain the what and the why. You know? Well, that's looking at history backwards. So, you know, Kierkegaard, the existentialist Danish philosopher, says, you know, you can look at it two ways. You know, you can look at living two ways. You can look backwards, where you have the opportunity to make sense of things, to set up a narrative. You can look at cause and effect, but you can only do that while you're looking backwards. If you're living, you're going forwards, which is full of confusion and choices and the unknown. And so in a way, it's possible to do interpretation such that, you know, at least historical interpretation, that you could drop somebody in time, drop somebody literally in the stream of time, and try to embrace the confusion and not, you know, asking people to make decisions and imagine what it would be like to be at the place. Freeman Tilden, the father of interpretive philosophy, said way back when, he said, historical interpretation, when it works, is always answering the question, what would it have been like for me? What would it have been like if I was there? Now, I think the same thing works on the natural side, but somebody's got to work it out better than I do. I think Rachel Carson's on it with awe. I think too often I go to sites and naturalists give me all kinds of stuff about how the flowers put together, and, you know, the foliation occurs, blah, 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 blah. I get the what and the why, right? Instead of the experience of awe. Instead of, you know, first of all, allowing me to, wow, care enough about the place. Then I want to come back and learn more and care for the place. Does that make sense? You know, I suspect that all natural history stuff, even before you guys went off to grad school, became scientists, and they beat the poetry out of you, right? You fell in love with this stuff first, you know, it meant something to you know, deep down inside, the beauty, the power, the awe. That's what the visitor needs. That's what the visitor needs to connect into. That's an engagement strategy. That's a way of having people be part of the place more than just receivers of our message. Does that make sense? One of the questions that I was challenged with here is, okay, if we're talking about climate change into the future, and I know that there are cultural sites here as well as natural sites, how does a cultural site interpret climate change? You know, one of my nightmares when I was on the line was, you know, the most recent Washington thrust, the most recent Washington emphasis, you know, that we're all going to have to talk about. You know, every talk has to have 10 minutes on, what was it? Biodiversity was one of them way back when, you know. Huh? Clearing the air. With, you know, so here am I trying to talk about John Brown or something, and I got to do 10 minutes on something I don't know a damn thing about, I don't care about, because I'm young and I'm in the field and I love the Civil War. I don't get it, right? And it just doesn't work, and we look stupid when we do stuff like that. How do you do it so it makes sense? How does a place do climate change so that it fits into the work that they're doing? And I think it's eminently possible. I think the question that interpreters and cultural sites ask themselves is, how did we get where we are? How did we get here? So a place like Harpers Ferry, it's easy. It's an industrial town, 19th century industrial town. The Industrial Revolution is happening here. So I can talk about that same woman who is going to the farmer's market on Wednesdays and Saturdays to get her food until 1836, when the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad comes through town. When the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad comes through town, it connects Harpers Ferry to every port, you know, in the Western world. Stuff can get to Harpers Ferry, manufactured goods overnight. By the 1850s, you know, you've got canned goods. You've got merchants who will fill up a boxcar full of oysters at the bay and run them up to Harpers Ferry the next day, right? Well, that's the beginning of us like moving food around and moving stuff around, right? And the beginning of the need to buy stuff and to fill our houses up full of stuff that make our lives better, and make our lives easier, right? People see that. They start to become, what am I trying to say, literate about energy and about how, you know, it just didn't happen overnight. We did this. And I think that once you start to talk about what's going on in the past, it's not that hard to make a step if you've got the science in your place to what's going on here now. Doesn't that make sense? Now it's like this. It used to be like that. Now it's like this. What about your prairie sites? I'm reading about food here, the whole corn thing. I don't know what I was thinking. It's like amazing. I mean, it's scary. You know, the whole world is made out of corn. And then, you know, the nitrogen, you know, fixing. Holy crap. You know, there's a lot of people out there like me. You go to a prairie site, help me understand that. Help me understand that, you know, that the agriculture that those people were reaching for, you know, didn't work. You know, climate change, holy crap, Dust Bowl is pretty close to a feeling about climate change, you know? Beyond the 100th Meridian stuff, John Wesley Powell. I mean, you guys have that stuff. If you talk about it in the past, it's nothing to step right into when scientists and research managers in our park are saying this is happening now. Does that make sense? Yeah? And then you can do some really cool stuff. I've got a scout, he's really smart. I'd like to take credit for this myself, but he spent about 4 hours doing this. Okay, so we're talking about Civil War soldiers, right? Food, fuel, and fodder. You get an artillery piece, one piece of artillery. You need 6 pieces of artillery to make up a battery, right? These are estimates. Most batteries had 6, sometimes had 4, whatever. But this is to give you an idea about numbers, about time. So 6 guns make up a battery, right? So 69 batteries of artillery, or about what the Army of the Potomac, the Union Army has, the Eastern Army of the Potomac has during the American Civil War over its 4 years. So that's a lot of guns, right? Now, every one of those guns has 6 horses. Now, I'm not talking about the limbers, the ammunition chests. I'm not talking about the supply lines behind every one of these artillery batteries. I'm just talking just the guns, just those 6 guns, right? So there's your horses, right? 2,484 horses are dragging guns around during the Civil War. Every horse eats 14 pounds of hay and 12 pounds of grain a day. Okay? So 34,706 pounds of hay, 29,808 pounds of grain per day. That's a lot. 12,693,240 pounds of hay and 10,879,920 pounds of grain per year. Right? If only half of that is moved by train to the soldiers, to the artillery batteries, the distance of from Chicago to Washington, because, and that's a reasonable guess, because much of the war fighting is going on around here, right? So if half of those numbers are moved 450 miles, you've got 7,955,381 pounds of coal to move those 4 years worth of fodder. CO2 that comes out of that coal is 23,309,266 pounds of CO2 over the 4 years of war. Is that wow? What a footprint. Now, here's where you make it real. Here's where you bring it to now. A modern coal power plant, how much CO2 does it put out? 23,309,266 pounds of CO2 in 31 hours. So you literally got 4 years of the war in 31 hours, equaling 31 hours of a single coal plant today. Does that just freak you out? Here's another little example. A pound of black powder, gunpowder. It took 80 pounds of black powder to wound a soldier, meaning that much was used and never hit anybody, right? You're just dividing wounds into masses of powder. 240 pounds of black powder to kill a single soldier during the war, right? That's a lot. Battle of Antietam had 3,654 men killed, 17,292 men wounded, and there were 2,260,320 pounds of powder expended during the battle. That produced 1,101,906 pounds of CO2. Gettysburg, more people killed, longer battle, 7,863 killed, 27,224 men wounded. You have 4,065,040 pounds of powder expended during the battle. And that's almost 2 million pounds of CO2 put into the air over that 3-day fight at Gettysburg. It's a lot. Modern coal plant, Antietam is worth 88 minutes of the operation. Gettysburg is worth 2.5 hours of the operation. 4 years of war, both sides, 52,800 pounds of powder is expended. It's a lot. Produces 25,740,000 pounds of CO2. That's the equivalent of Hiroshima in a quarter in terms of explosion ability, right? Modern coal plant, 4 years of war, it's equal to 34 hours of operation. So, that took about 4 hours to figure out, and I can defend that if somebody wants it later on. I can give you the sources on that material. If Civil War nerds can figure out ways to answer the question of how do we get where we are, and then bring it to right now, if we can do that, then I think anybody can do that. Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay. Well, I've kind of given you the heart of what I'm about. I don't need to belabor it a whole lot. In the end, I'm hoping that we together realize some things. One of them is that we need to meet audiences where they are. We need to find out where we are ourselves, and if we really want to do this or not, and what are the consequences of not being flexible to meet audiences. I think that we need to embrace the evaluation effort that's going on at the national level. We're starting to invest money in doing more evaluation at the part level of interpretation education. But I think that you could also go home and do some informal evaluation with no problem. Interpreters and research managers talk to visitors all the time. when you're talking to a visitor, to ask them about their attitudes, to ask them about, well, what does this place mean to you? What do you think about climate change? What do you think about global warming? And listen. You don't have to win an argument. You don't have to persuade. Find out what their perspective is. Find out what your 6 Americas are. You know what I mean? That's the national 6 Americas. What are the 6 Americas at your place? What are the demographics of your place? What values and meanings are people coming to in your place? And it can be informal. You have a conversation. At the end of the day, you jot a few of those conversations down. You start to code. You start, over time, you figure out, well, how do you get a group together like this? It's not defendable in a big way scientifically, but you'll be a better communicator if you do that, if you work on that. And if you're a supervisor or if you're chief of interpretation, assign your people to do it. At staff meeting, what's the funkiest thing somebody told you this week about global warming? Everyone knows, staff should know that you're going to ask this question, that you're going to have this conversation. You come up with a playbook, You can plan how to answer funky questions and weird situations that visitors bring to you if you come together and if you talk about it in some way. That's informal evaluation. It's part of an evaluation culture, short of having to spend money and go through OMB and all that stuff to get somebody to come in and do it all for you. So I'm hoping we think about evaluation. I hope we think about meeting the visitor where they are. I hope we appreciate the seeds that we can plant. That's the essence of interpretation. It's just provocation. It's helping people shift a bit and think. I hope we can see this as a long-term game, that the more we evaluate, the more that we talk with each other, the more we learn about those audiences, the effective ways that we communicate with them will shift, and we'll be able to keep up with them if we're paying attention over time. I'm hoping that the scientists can recognize that the communication is that difficult, that the science alone is not enough to carry the day.